Well, I just got my hands on Absolute Flashpoint, so it's no better time than now to dive right in and compare this with the previous collected editions. Cue the intro. Happy New Year everybody, I hope you all had an awesome time over the holidays and got everything you always wanted. So I thought I would kick off 2019 big with an Absolute Edition. There have been many fantastic releases from DC these past few weeks, but given this Absolute Edition was long overdue, I thought I would give it some love by doing a thorough review. Just a heads up, I'll be diving a bit into spoiler territory here, but I promise I will try to hold back as much as possible so you can get the most fulfilling experience when you pick up Flashpoint yourself and read it cover to cover. I know you are eager as I am to get into this, so without further hesitation, let's get started. In May 2001, DC began the event that arguably resulted in the most ambitious reboot in comic book history, which was the New 52. Jeff Johns, coming off the highly successful Blackest Night and Brightest Day major DC events, was to be the writer that was responsible for the last major story of the post-crisis DC universe. Johns definitely was the right man for the job, for not only being the all-star writer that he is, but he was also responsible for reintroducing Barry Allen back to the DC universe after being missing for nearly 2 decades due to the events of Crisis on Infinite Earths. In the Flash Rebirth 6-issue miniseries, which is currently collected in trade paperback form, we have Johns make Barry Allen the primary Flash again, and not only that, but he establishes that Barry didn't just tap into the Speed Force like the other speedsters, but he actually created it. We also see that Eobard Thawne, aka the Reverse Flash, is solidified as the primary villain for Barry, and his powers is described as that he generates a Speed Force that is negatively charged and uses that to infect Barry in this series in the hopes that the negative Speed Force would consume Barry's loved ones and the speedsters who rely on it. I will talk more about the background reading and preludes associated with Flashpoint, but I wanted to emphasize and more importantly establish that Barry Allen and Eobard Thawne, aka the Reverse Flash, are essentially the two main characters responsible for Flashpoint, and in this series it's where it all kicks off. More specifically, it is in Flash Rebirth where it is established that it was Thawne who killed Barry's mother, and he orchestrated his life to become the forensic scientist that he is today. Flashpoint kicks off where Barry Allen wakes up to a world where everything around him has changed. He is no longer the Flash, nor does he have his powers, but to his joy his mother is alive. Although as a major change as this was to Barry's life, it was nothing compared to the other changes to the DCU that he'll come to know. First, we see that it was Thomas Wayne who became a much more brutal Batman, and Martha Wayne losing her battle to a mental illness, which transformed her into the Joker. The cause of all this was that in Crime Alley it was actually Bruce that was shot, not the parents. The current world is also in crisis as Aquaman's Atlanteans and Wonder Woman's Amazonians are at war with each other, which endangers the entire planet and already has costed tens of millions of lives. The trigger for this was the decapitation of Mera by Wonder Woman. We then get introduced to Lois Lane and Steve Trevor, who are working for the US government to spy on Wonder Woman and the Amazonians. Cyborg is also gathering a group of superheroes to recruit, including Batman and the Shazam family, who in this world transform into Captain Thunder. Once Barry realizes the timeline had been altered and his memory started to realign itself, resulting in him losing the memory of the post-crisis timeline, he turned to Thomas Wayne to help him successfully get his powers back. At this time, Barry also blames Thawne for altering this timeline. Some other notable changes in this world would be Kal-El landing in the middle of Metropolis instead of Smallville, causing the meteor trail behind his ship to cause the destruction to millions of people. He was also locked away and experimented on by the US government under the government program called Project Superman. Hal Jordan also never became the Green Lantern and was one of the first casualties in an Amazonian invisible plane Air Force raid. Oliver Queen is the head of Green Arrow Industries, who is a major military contractor that steals advanced gadgets from supervillains for military use. Leonard Snart, aka Citizen Cold, was a hero of Central City, and Destro captains a pirate ship in search for his daughter. Hit me up in the comments below if you already had read this and have a favorite story arc in the Flashpoint universe. Also note that some of the character arcs I have just mentioned may not be in the main 5-issue story, but in the World of Flashpoint tie-ins. The story then moves on to the climax with a huge battle resulting in many big deaths, betrayal and surprises. It is at the pivotal moment where the Reverse Flash reveals himself and restores Barry's lost memories that he was actually responsible for this altered timeline when he went back in time to stop his mother from being murdered. Basically, this revelation circles all the way back to Flash Rebirth, where Thorne revealed how he had engineered Barry's life since he was a child, but Barry just didn't understand the full ramifications of trying to restore to a very original timeline where Barry's parents lived a very happy and long life together. For those who are familiar with the CW show, fans have been responding to Barry's timeline screw-ups with a whole bunch of memes, but it's always been small potatoes compared to what Barry did to create the Flashpoint universe in the comics. In the final moments of the Flashpoint universe, we have Thomas Wayne insisting Barry Allen to restore the timeline so he can undo the tens of millions of deaths, even if it means at the cost of not saving his mother. This restoration of the timeline, as many of you would know, would result in the creation of the New 52, where 3 different timelines, the DC Universe, Vertigo and Wildstorm, would all merge together and remove a decade of history as stated by the immortal Pandora. Thankfully, we would see a glimpse of the Flashpoint altered timeline again in the Batman Flash Button crossover, where Barry questions that somebody is keeping this altered timeline again as a separate world. Hopefully I have given you an extensive overview of Flashpoint and all its tie-ins, but one aspect I have not touched upon is the background reading material required for this epic 61 issue saga. Well, you're in luck because Flashpoint doesn't come with any mandatory must-reads, assuming you already have a good high-level knowledge of the DC universe. But to expand more on what I briefly touched on earlier, the Flash Rebirth and Jeff Johns' Flash series flesh out Barry Allen's reintroduction to the DC universe and the main antagonist Eobard Thawne, who is the Reverse Flash. The meat of it all was in the Road to Flashpoint storyline, which was in issues 8 to 12 of Jeff Johns and Francis Manapul's Flash run, which kicked off in 2010 after Flash Rebirth and Brightest Day. It's definitely a great read that contains the origin story of Eobard Thawne and heavy references to the upcoming event, which changes everything, but I wouldn't say it's mandatory reading to understand the events of Flashpoint. If you have $10 to spare and you can find it at your local comic book store, it's definitely worth picking up, but I wouldn't postpone diving into Flashpoint if you cannot get a hold of this prelude. As for the other prelude we have here is Time Master's Vanishing Point. The book's main premise was the hunt for Batman, where he was lost in time after the events of Final Crisis, but that doesn't really dive in or steps on the toes of Grant Morrison's The Return of Bruce Wayne storyline. How this book ties into Flashpoint is basically just a lead-in on the last page where it teases the world of Flashpoint. Flashpoint was first collected in a standard hardcover, which I have here. It was later reprinted as a trade paperback, but it contains the very same contents. The standard hardcover was very decently put together, as underneath the dust jacket we get wraparound art from Andy Kubert and Alex Sinclair rather than blackboards. I believe this was used for the San Diego 2011 Comic-Con exclusive. For the extras, we not only get the typical variant cover gallery, but a Hive Council map of the world threats, but also a very extensive look at the sketches and designs from Andy Kubert. Now for the unwrapped edition, if you've never seen Andy Kubert's pencil work before, then without a doubt I highly recommend you pick this up. The attention to detail and the line work is just a joy to look at. DC has done right by the fans by adding Flashpoint to the unwrapped line of books. Now moving on to all the tie-ins, DC have 5 trade paperbacks that collects all the 56 issues of the Flashpoint 3-issue miniseries, one-shots and Booster Gold issues 44 to 47. It is definitely possible to read the core Flashpoint 5-issue saga without reading all the tie-ins and one-shots, but from my point of view, these tie-ins are essential if you, the reader, want to see the core characters more fleshed out in this changed timeline. How this is collected across the 5 volumes is unfortunately a bit of a mess if your pure desire is to read this in chronological order. Personally, it didn't bother me at all to first read the main 5-issue story, then the tie-ins, as I felt it flows much better when reading the 3-issue arcs back to back rather than jumping all over the place. Once you're also done with the tie-ins, you'll come to appreciate the core 5-issue arc even more. Let me know in the comments below on your reading experience if you took this approach to reading Flashpoint. In terms of how the world of Flashpoint is grouped across the 5 trades, I've listed the contents of each trade. Feel free to hit the pause button to let this all sink in, but I have also added this in the description below if you want to reference or purchase any of the trades from Amazon later on. And finally, for the extras, unfortunately we did not get any in each of the 5 trade paperbacks. Now finally moving to the edition that you came here to see, this is the Absolute edition of Flashpoint. Starting off with what it collects. It only contains a 5-issue event, but this shouldn't be a surprise to any reader because the high end for a single Absolute volume hits around 750 pages. So if we were to include the entire 1200 pages of the World of Flashpoint tie-ins and one-shots in addition to the 5-issue main storyline, then that would be absolute insanity. Pun intended. The omnibus format would be more suitable to collect everything Flashpoint in a single volume, but I actually would prefer to see a 2-volume Absolute Flashpoint companion. In my personal opinion, these tie-ins and one-shots truly flesh out the DCU in this alternate timeline, and there should be no need to go down the omnibus route if we have the 3-volume Absolute Flashpoint set. As for the design of the book, we have an amazing slipcase with art from Andy Kubert and the infamous mirror wraparound art of Barry and Eobard Thawne for the Absolute cover. The design is absolutely complementary to the artwork, as we see when we flick through these pages throughout the introduction by Andy Kubert and the table of contents. Damian Ryland and the DC Collected Editions team did an amazing job designing this edition, so no complaints here. The paper stock is solid like other DC Absolute editions, but unfortunately we have to mention a negative aspect here on the binding, as it was never fixed from the previous editions. What I am talking about is that where we have double page spreads, we actually see some gutter loss. This definitely was seen in the hardcover edition, but sadly the printing and binding company who handles putting this together for DC never rectified it for the Absolute. It is quite a bit of a disappointment, because this is probably the most definitive moment of the entire storyline where the events give birth to the New 52, and this gutter loss truly affects Adam Kubert's stunning splash page. If you think I'm over exaggerating here, this is from the digital release, and now compare this back to the Absolute edition. What makes up for this is definitely in the extras. The DC team definitely collected a lot of material for this Absolute edition, which is a joy to any fan of this epic event. Like most Absolutes, the extras start off with an extensive cover gallery, but we also get a teaser ad from the Flash issue 1. What's new, I believe, is the very detailed timelines we get that walks us through the world of Flashpoint throughout the years. To add to this, we also get the Flashpoint Encyclopedia, which breaks down all the character changes. The DC team definitely went all out here. This is such a nice touch. As I have previously mentioned, even though we don't get all the tie-ins, we get a checklist of items so the reader knows that there is companion material out there. There is also extensive character and logo designs here for those who love to see concept work at play. Now for readers who didn't pick up the unwrapped edition, they get treated for material they missed out on, because we got a whole slew of cover sketches, the Flashpoint issue 1 script with Kubert's pencils, and even alternate pencils. And lastly, for the collectibles fan, we see the making of the Flashpoint action figures and artwork from the Flashpoint animated feature. Now to close out the video with my final thoughts, DC has kicked off Flashpoint being the first Absolute Edition release of the year, even though to my knowledge there are no hints of any companion volumes to be released in Absolute format. Seeing this apocalyptic world explored by Barry Allen on these oversized pages was a joy to reread this epic event. Now I hand this question off to you. Given we have Andy Kubert's stunning work on these oversized pages coupled with Jeff Johns' A+ writing for the Absolute Edition, will you be picking this up if you already own the floppies or hardcover or trade paperback? Or if you're new to Flashpoint, will you be immediately skipping over the trades and purchase this Absolute Edition given the new release? Put your thoughts in the comments below. Again, many thanks for your support this past year, and if you have any questions or comments, feel free to reach out to me here on YouTube or Instagram and Twitter, because that's where I lurk about posting my weekly floppy holes and rant on various miscellaneous things. This is Alex, and I'll catch you in the next video.